Good morning and hello, friends. Good to see you again for this installment of Hymn of the Week. It's a delight for Pastor Harry and myself to bring this to you again today as we begin a new series which Pastor Harry will tell you about. It has something to do with the call that Jesus gives us to follow Him, which comes in many ways. As I think about my own life, as a young lad growing up in a Christian family, I sensed the call to follow Jesus when I was 6 years old and invited Him into my heart with a prayer of simple faith that a child would often pray. But along the way, of course, Jesus has called me and my wife to different journeys, more specific things or particular callings along the way. I recall very vividly in I believe it was the spring of 1987 when Sandy and I were finishing off my university years, when we had a clear sense of call that the Lord was calling us to move to the Maritimes from the prairies and become involved in helping with the church there. We would look back on that now and say, yes, Jesus called us. He calls us along the way. He calls us in these directional moments, and then He calls us on a daily basis simply to follow Him in the way we choose to live, in the way we treat one another, in our attitudes, in our thoughts. We're called to follow Him in all of life. So let's go to two passages now that are, you might say, seminal passages for following Jesus and His calling to us, the calling of disciples and Jesus' words to follow Him. Let's go to Matthew 4, starting in verse 18, and then we'll go to a John passage. As Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, He saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. "Come, follow me," Jesus said, "and I will send you out to fish for people." At once they left their nets and followed Him. Going on from there, He saw two other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They were in a boat with their father Zebedee, preparing their nets. Jesus called them, and immediately they left the boat and their father and followed Him. Now we turn to John 21, where Jesus is having a conversation with Peter on the shore of the lake. Verse 15. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said, "you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep. Very truly, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go." Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then He said to him, "Follow me." Pastor Harry, why don't you introduce us to this new series of Hymns of the Week?
With the beginning of a new year, we begin a new series on the theme, Songs of Grace for Our Journey. The call of Jesus to follow opens the way for a lifelong journey with Jesus. Grace is His provision for that journey. It was not their first exposure to Jesus when He called 4 of His disciples to follow Him in Matthew chapter 4. The Gospel of John recorded another incident just a day after Jesus was baptized. John the Baptist and two of his disciples were near the Jordan River when they saw Jesus passing in the distance. Perhaps with a nod or by pointing toward Jesus, he said to his disciples, "Look, the Lamb of God." When the two disciples heard him say this, they followed Jesus. From the passage, we know that Andrew was one of the disciples, and we surmise that John was the other, since he is the only gospel writer to record this incident. It would seem that Jesus repeated the call to the same disciples multiple times, not just once at the beginning of their journey. His call is not a call only to begin, but to continue and complete the journey with Jesus. Most of us had multiple exposures to the gospel before we responded to the call of Jesus to follow him. Perhaps our first was when we were children. I came to Jesus as a frightened child, and he welcomed me with open arms and allayed my fears. But since I have faltered and failed many times on my journey, like Peter who denied Jesus, I've heard him again and again call to me in a patient voice, "Harry, follow me." Our hymn of the week reiterates this theme. Jesus calls us o'er the tumult of our life's wild, restless sea. Day by day his sweet voice soundeth, saying, "Christians, follow me." Jesus' call to us was the work, Jesus calls us, was the work of an Irish poet and hymn writer, Cecil Frances Alexander. She was born to her parents, John and Elizabeth Humphreys, in 1818 in the city of Dublin, Ireland. She began writing poetry as a child, and by her early 20s was already known for the poems and hymns she wrote. At first, she was primarily a writer of children's hymns. She believed that biblical truths could be effectively taught to children by means of songs. She wrote more than 400 hymns, most of them for children. Among her hymns were titles such as "All Things Bright and Beautiful," "There is a Green Hill Far Away," and also the well-known carol, "Once in Royal David's City." She was also involved in charitable work, using the proceeds of her hymns to build a school for the deaf and dumb in 1846. In 1850, when Cecil was 32, she was married to a prominent Anglican clergyman named William Alexander. After their marriage, she devoted herself to supporting his ministry, often writing poems to go with his sermons. Our hymn of the week, "Jesus Calls Us," was one such hymn. It was written in 1852 for St. Andrew's Day on the Anglican Church calendar. It was based on the call of Andrew described in Matthew 4, verse 19. It was a 5-verse poem, and Dr. Alexander used it at the conclusion of his sermon. The second verse, usually omitted in non-liturgical hymn books, reads, "As of old St. Andrew heard it, by the Galilean lake, turned from home and toil and kindred, leaving all for his dear sake." The other verses, still widely sung, challenges worshipers to hear the call of Jesus, to follow and serve and love Jesus Best of All. The music was composed by William H. Jude to the tune Galilee, especially composed for the lyrics of this hymn. Listen to the music as played by Calvin and Heather Dyck, and follow the words on your screens. Jesus Calls Us by Cecil Francis Alexander, our hymn of the week.